Hi, I'm Coach Oyama, and I have a passion to help you improve. Here's my contact if you're interested. I do all my coaching for free. All you got to do is ask me. I specialize in macro coaching, and so hopefully I can help provide you like 3 things that you can work on and focus on to improve your gameplay by the end of this vlog review. I'm just going through this raw, so if we see stuff and I go on tangents, please excuse me because I didn't do any prep work before. It's the first time that I'm seeing this spot. So Kiriko on Masters 3, I believe. Yeah, something like that. So starting off on the off angle, okay. Let's go ahead and take a look at this team fight back in. So in the very beginning, usually what I say is from a macro perspective, you got to know what's going to go on. If you go into the game blind, there's this quote from Art of War where it's like every time you something blind or something or another, if you don't know, you know you're not improving. So basically at the beginning of the team fight, just think about your team composition and what it's trying to accomplish. The win condition of your team composition, and it's going to be hard in comp because you don't have a set like preset scrim win condition and everyone's working together. The more you can understand, the better. And here is obviously going to be spam and how many angles you can get over the enemy team. You have a pocketed both DPS and a Doom who can be very flexible with making space on King's Row especially, so you can take this off angle here. So that I'm explaining why I like this off angle so much. As for what's going on in this fight here, so immediately you should think in your head, okay, this death is not your fault first of all, but in your head, you should look for the enemy team and scout. If your team is not calling out, you should have the idea of what's going on in your head, so then you're ready for what's going to happen. Because if you look at their team composition, they are looking to dive and rush you. They have no heals, and if they go over like 20 seconds in a team fight without getting a kill, they're probably screwed over unless their Hanzo like really pulls through. So for you, it immediately triggers in your brain, I have to at all costs make sure that we save teammates, and even if I use all my resources to save my teammates here, like Suzu right there, well, probably because he's in the middle of the open and he's critical. Looking at the Zarya, looking at the threats, your Doomfist is not in danger here, and you should look more towards your DPS because your Doomfist is a bit what's that called? Independent. Okay, and then your team gets crapped on. But like I was saying earlier about the win conditions, the way that you can better be playing in this team fight, because you're restricting your angles really heavily here. If you can play out here, because you have no damage fall off with their daggers, your shurikens or whatever they're called. So you can flank, you can take aggressive plays, you can look to take 1v1s on that Genji and force resources from the enemy team. Any trade of resources for your team is way better for you than them. Because any bubble, any Hanzo Storm Arrow, Sonic Arrow, Reflect, Dash, Lucio's Speed, Mercy GA will whittle them down a bit more towards your win condition. So sticking inside this room where your Doom is trying to brawl into the enemy team rather than playing far angles and trying to whittle them down is like a conflict of interest. So I think one of the overarching themes here is going to be your positioning and what you're trying to accomplish in this team fight. Because, you know, of course, you can try to squeeze water out of a dry towel and like get as much value as your kit as possible playing on your own. But if you be a bit flexible and just go as the flow as your team is doing, it might be greatly beneficial to your gameplay here. Let's go ahead and look at this next point here. So after first point, I always recommend for everyone to ult track, because a lot of the times the first ult's coming out and the second fight will be defining of who wins the fight. So also, quick tip for competitive play, if you want to rank up in comp games, identify the strongest player and the weakest player on each team. If the strongest player is you, it's gonna suck because you're gonna have to step up and carry. The strongest player is obviously their Hanzo because he's carried both of these fights now. Okay, then you need to mitigate how much the Hanzo is doing, and then the weakest player, especially on support, you need to mitigate how much they're feeding, and so you might need to give them a bit more attention. So it's probably going to be whoever your soldier was, your Ashe, because they died first 2 fights in a row. So you should look in your head, not necessarily that you have to Suzu them more often, but this game is also a role. I'll talk a little bit about mentality, because in the game of Overwatch itself, okay, I feel like you're tilting, you're not playing around the corners anymore. So maybe it's the fact that you don't have corner discipline and that you were just cowarding because you're not able to properly manage that. I like that 1v1 with the Genji, very nice. Good mechanics there. But, you know, there are some games that are unwinnable. I'll talk about it a little bit towards the end. Also, okay, I can talk about healing priority too. I feel like you have a bit of tunnel visioning in your healing priority. As a support player, it's very important, or as any player in Overwatch, it's very important to gather information from the fights as you're doing things. So in this fight, I can guarantee you, if we were in a scrim and I could pause the game, I wouldn't do this to the enemy team, but if I pause the game right here, when you were trying to heal your Ashe, not necessarily that it's bad that you're healing your Ashe here, but what I want you to notice is, I can tell from your body language that you're only focusing on the Ashe, because you're strafing in the middle of this open angle in front of their Hanzo, which is their strongest player, and that tells me that you're way too tunneled on the targets you're focusing. And to confirm my thesis back here, when you're healing your Mercy, your Ashe went up for a contest on the enemy Hanzo, and you were still healing your Mercy after one burst of heals. Your Mercy is fine. She's going to live. She's very independent compared to everyone on your team except for Doomfist, who is even more independent. But if you're pocketing your Ashe here, this is a much higher chance that you're going to win the game because of a pocketed duel here, which is enabling your teammates, the entire point of support. So you can better provide utility by enabling your teammates in that fashion. So I'm going to recommend at least one of the points here in the end for sure. It's going to be, you need to work on your mechanics in the sense that your movement and aiming on any support, you should be able to be aware and conscious of everything that's going on, so then you can adapt on the fly and be ready to change targets, use your ult, use your cooldowns as necessary in the fight, rather than just heal, heal, heal. I'm blind, I look again, healing, healing, I'm blind while I'm healing, and then refocusing targets. It should be more of like you're pulled back looking at the fight and you can better recognize what's going on. Okay. I honestly feel kind of bad because your DPS are really bad. They're not playing corners. For you also though, yeah, so 1 is going to be the healing priority, 2 is going to be playing corners. It kind of branches out of that healing priority, but I feel like you're really, you don't respect the Hanzo enough, if I want to call it that. I think you do, that's the thing, that's why I don't want to say that, but it's just rather that you're too tunneled. Maybe it's your mechanics, maybe it's you're just not aware of the fact that you're out in the open a lot of the times, but especially in these neutral fights in which you are sitting in main right here. Or, okay. Done this to myself. But okay, yeah, right here. Zoom back like 2 seconds. Okay, right here, where you're just like okay, this is a bad example, but when you're just sitting in main in front of the Hanzo's LOS, I've noticed this multiple times in this fight, because you're standing pretty much still. If we look at like this strafing right here to any enemy, if they shoot, especially in this crack, which is a choke point for like Hanzo's, Widow's, Genji's to shoot down, Zenyatta's to shoot down, on it to shoot a random sleep dart through. Let's just play this at 0.75 times to accentuate it. But you're standing still in the open in these strafes here. If Hanzo shoots his arrow anywhere in this area where you're strafing, you can see how it's like very, very risky, and it's, I don't think you're just properly, that you just knew about it. So now that you know about it, try to be very diligent about your engages. And I'm not saying that you don't have to ever go out and shoot the enemies, because you know you have to expose yourself at some point. But make sure you're very diligent about your movement, and you're careful about not strafing in the same place. Man, I love that change how they gave Zarya the bubble breaking. Okay. I'm not going to talk about ult tracking because I don't think we're at the point where it's manageable enough for you. I think you have stuff to work on before the ult tracking, even though I'd really like to see the ult tracking. Okay, I am going to talk about the pre-fight phases. So obviously it's power in numbers. It's best to fight 5v5s, and this comes from a bit more of experience, but as you can see, your team is going to be fighting a 5v5. You could have gotten 2 fights in, or 1.5 fights, but now you're only getting 1 fight in because you guys were staggering there. So I'm assuming that you already know what staggering is, because everyone says don't stagger, die early or get out. Die early, get out is what I in the teams that I coach, specific team phrases that we have, where it's very important for us to be on the same page doing the same things. Die early and get out is one of those things that'll make or break a team, because it's a fundamental. If you don't do it, then you're just losing out on like so much possible value. Okay. I think this game is a wash, to be honest. I'm not gonna lie to you, a lot that you could have done, but I think even if you did do everything perfectly, it seems like the enemy team matchmaking is just, you can't win them all. Yeah, and I'll talk about that right now as the round is coming to a close, because this is all just mechanics, and this is all just getting better at aiming and movement and target priority, and so like awareness. Oh, are you guys gonna win this fight? I don't think so, right? Okay, yeah. Yeah, and it's just stalling out for the next 30 seconds. Okay. So, the cost of winning, let's say you're a professional player and your win rate, you know, it'll go up as you go down in rank. So if you're in bronze, it'll probably be like 100%. You know, 100% unranked GMs on like multiple characters. You see those very often. But if you're in GM or where you're supposed to be, it's just over 50%. So it's very hard. It's an art of balancing when it is your fault and when you can learn from your mistakes, and when sometimes the mistakes are just the cost of playing Overwatch and the cost of trying to get better. In your brain, the best way to think about this is I'm responsible for every mistake that my team did, but don't degrade yourself. Don't say I'm worth, I deserve, or no, you do deserve the losses, but they're not your fault all the time. So it's in that fact that you're able to put yourself into the mindset that I can always improve no matter what's going on. If I lose, I deserve it, and I can always improve. Even though it's not my fault, I still deserve the loss because that means that I can improve somewhere. And of course, there are games, like 1 out of 100 will be like totally not your fault. Like you played literally perfectly, like you, if an Owl Scouter saw that game, that you would be an Owl, but it's best to just think about like that and build a resilience. Okay, AFK here. Build a resilience towards the fact that you're going to be losing a lot of games, and instead of taking anger out on yourself or sadness or pity, use that and channel your efforts into finding areas that you can improve within your own gameplay. Okay, with that random like tangent out, I'm watching this team fight and seeing how you can best play. Okay, so on a macro perspective, it's really hard to get your entire team to play on the exact same wavelength here. But things that you can do, if you can communicate with your team and tell your Mercy that you, it would be way better if you guys had like a Zenyatta or a Lucio here instead of a Mercy, because she can't really pocket anyone. But you have this Jungle Queen, and for you, you're just trying to build ultimate in this fight. Your team doesn't really have a win condition that's going to win over the enemy team, because they do everything that you do just a little bit better, to be honest. And that's kind of scuffed, because it's like setting yourself up to lose, but you can still always win. You know, you can wiggle your way into the victory because the enemy is going to be making mistakes. In this team fight, I would say focus on getting your ult on the Junker Queen, and then when the enemy eventually mismanages their cooldowns, you guys will be able to take great advantage of it. And we can see here that you're like slowly breaking through. I think this, for the most part, I really like this gameplay. I feel like it's a bit better than attack, or sorry, defense, except we still have these moments where you're wandering way too far out. Yeah, I like your cooldown management, I like your Suzus, but yeah, your positioning right here, you don't have to be all the way out here, even though you still have your dash. It's very evident to me that you have no idea who's in main and who's shooting you, and even though at the time that you cleared it in your brain, and your RAM in your brain is just like, oh, main's not there. If Zarya pushes through, if there's another DPS that comes through, I can tell that you're not ready for them to come through, and it's you know, your reaction time is infinitely more faster. Not infinitely, not scientifically infinitely, but your reaction time is so much more faster if you're ready for what's about to come. You know, like if you're doing a reaction time test, you know it's going to come and you're ready for it, versus when someone says think fast, you like, it's very hard to catch a ball or something that they're throwing at you when they say think fast or block it, you know what I mean? So getting ready for that is the actionable step that you can do, and that comes with awareness, that comes with positioning, that comes with and the things that are limiting you from that are, again, your mechanics and your mechanics and mindset, really, because when it comes down to it, you're going to be in the game, you're going to be nervous, you're going to be focusing, and so if you can stop tunnel visioning and, you know, make sure that your mechanics aren't getting in the way because you're focusing too much mental capital in your mechanics rather than your awareness, and you're thinking about the overall game of like chess of what's going on in Overwatch. Because in reality, you know, we're like from a certain perspective of Overwatch, we're just a bunch of pieces playing together, trying to optimize our gameplay. You know, wouldn't it suck if your like knight in chess just literally just didn't move correctly because it sucked? Well, that, you know, we are those pieces in the overall image of the macro, and if we don't perform, then we are that underperforming knight. I really like your positioning earlier there on the side. I feel like you got a lot of value out of that positioning. As for how this team fight is going, you could have Suzu'd your Junker Queen. If we're going to talk about ult tracking, then we should be able to... There's an entire different world of knowing the enemy's ults, knowing your ults, and how to play around it, because it introduces such a great complexity above the first fight, or a dry fight, which is what first fights are. And I'm just not going to go into that right now. I feel like I said earlier, the positioning mistakes and such. For example, one positioning mistake here is, let's talk about threats and what I call danger levels. So a danger level for like high GM is if you ever get hit like 50 health in high GM against this Ashe, you gotta be very, very, very careful. If you're in bronze, you can be at 20 HP living for like the next 30 seconds and no one will kill you. So it's in that you gotta manage how much health you have and what resources you have to get out of the situation. You still have both your cooldowns, but if you get headshot here, I would be very, very, very cautious at 90 HP because both DPS are out in the open. Everyone is out in the open. You have no corner immediately to hide behind. I would be cowarding behind the corner, looking to use my cooldowns to save me and reset, so then I'm at full potential and I can go out and provide even more value with the resources that I have once I reset. Otherwise, I'm like slowly straining myself and always giving out like a constant like 85% compared to my 100 if I just reset, gain a better positioning. Okay, again, let's talk about the pre-fight planning resetting here. It's better just to go in and just die. I mean, you're on Curie, so it's a bit less of a damaging mistake to the overall macro because you can just TP back to your teammates, but still it's way better to just regroup with your teammate. Don't take that risk of like, you know, staggering. Okay. In this team fight, let's talk about win conditions for the team fight, because especially on supports where your ultimates are fight turning, or on everyone really, when you have your ultimate, try to position and play for your ultimate, because you have your ult at the beginning of this fight and it should be a win condition, or at least forced to be, and in that, knowing that and playing around it, you'll gain more consistency as a player, because instead of relying on your micro and the ability to get picks on the off angle like this, if you consistently start thinking about, okay, if they have beat, or this is the ult tracking part, but when you have your ult, if you consistently start playing in main and using your ult instead of risking dying over here for nothing, or not for nothing, risking trying to get a kill and then dying for the kill, but not being able to use your ult, that's a very high risk play, and I don't think you're at the level where you're actively thinking about managing that risk. I think that you kind of just forgot about your ult and you're now like, we forgot to plan for your ult in your gameplay. Okay, this is very nice. That was a pretty good ult, I would say. Like I was talking about earlier, I would much rather have you plan for the ult rather than use it out of convenience, because that's where the consistency will come. Otherwise, you're just, you know, playing for your micro and then gambling that you're just better than the enemies in the micro aspect. Let's watch this team fight here. And again, Kiriko's great strength over playing, okay, well, first of all, over playing, let's say, for example, Baptiste is her cleanse is not as strong as Baptiste's lamp, because it does cleanse, but it won't go around corners and it won't stay alive for as long. But the fact that your ultimate is so much more impactful, and then compared to Ana, the cleanse, but also the ultimate is so much more impactful for your team playing together, especially on King's Row, where everything is very tightly condensed. The lanes are very close to the side, so they can't just hard kite necessarily off the cart, or else they're going to lose the cart. The faster you get ult in these team fights, the better. And I want you to, in the neutral, think about getting your ult more than attacking. And it sounds a bit contradictory to earlier, because I was talking about trying to gain more angles earlier, but on this point especially, I think adaptively, even on double sniper, I would rather have you getting ult than taking flanks on this point compared to the first point. But the first and third are a bit similar, where you can take a bit more, go to the high grounds, take a little bit more flanks and risk. But on the second point, pushing through is going to be your best option here. And this is just just how the map is made. And like for you to be able to apply this to other maps, for example, like Numbani, I would say look for angles, take the angles. Even if you get main, they can kite out. A map like King's Row or a map like Circuit, or New Queen Street, where there's nowhere to go. If you build your ultimate, Kiriko's not really that good on that map, but if you build your ultimate, it's much more consistent to ult in main rather than get picks on the side. And even though you can get picks on the side and be that kind of player, you're not going to see the same consistency over the macro of your gameplay, and you're going to eventually have to see the consistency in the macro of your game. So going over the 3 things that I want you to work on in this game is 1, we need to focus on your positioning and addressing properly managing and assessing threats in the enemies. This is a whole area that we can spend like an hour reviewing your gameplay and looking at different areas that so one example is right here where your team is losing space. I see that you start falling back, but it's about you know, playing in the open areas. Like this is an open area here, you can get headshot, and so I would say just get, like, leave your casted eye or just get out right here. So that's one of them. And then there's a couple of cheap shots that like aren't great macro things that you just need to like one and done fix. So one of them, yeah, so the first one was your positioning and watching out for those threats. Don't recklessly manage your risks and stand out in the open. Don't recklessly manage your positioning and not play for picks on a certain angle when your team is trying to build their ults, or when you should be building your ults. That's kind of ambiguous piece of advice, so you don't have to really think about that much as I want you to yeah, I'm speaking in circles. Let's go to the next point. Or to help you with that last one especially, and kind of tagging on to the second one, I want you to stop tunnel visioning. Let's go back to that second point defense, where I can tell that you were just like hard tunnel visioning your or third point defense, where you're hard tunnel visioning your team here, and it's preventing you from being able to properly assess what's going on in the team fights here. Because you're playing out in the open, well, it's a bad team fight because you kind of have to play out in the open, but in the neutral here, if you're playing out in the open, a good GM player is going to tap you in the head, and like it's going to be a loss instantly. And so why not just play like a GM, because you'll just win your games in Masters if you're playing like a GM. So this is a bad example. I think it's this fight, no, the fight before that, yeah, like this, where this is a very risky play, and tunnel visioning your mechanics. Actually, this fight was pretty decent. Needless to say, get your movement down first of all. If you don't know where you're moving, you can't know where you're aiming. Second, get your aim down. If you know where you're moving, but you don't know where you're aiming, you're going to be focusing only on your aim. Once you get those two like the back of your hand, then you can think about the third one. The third one, where it's awareness about what's going on, when you need to switch targets, when you need to use your abilities, when you can use your ult, when you can reposition, and that way you'll start to build consistency. And it's only in those first two, movement and aim, in which you're able to get over that barrier and that skill gap, that skill wall, that you'll be able to see more consistency. And it's not about hitting your shots, it's not about being perfectly moving. It's more of being so consistent and having so much control and fluidity over your movement and aim that you can start to think about other things. Because right now I can tell your brain is very tied up in the movement of things. It feels very panicking. You can't have jittery aim, you can't have jittery movement, but to me it just feels like yeah, you're not properly assessing threats, and that just tells me that you're way too focused on your mechanics. Yeah, two random things would be the losing thing, because this game, I'm gonna be honest, I don't think your team would have won if you were playing perfectly. There's a chance, or every game is winnable, but this was a rough one. You know, take accountability for your mistakes and still try to improve, even in these games where it's not necessarily your fault, but you could have done so much better. And it's about the process, not the results. Love playing the game. don't love winning, and eventually the winning will come, and then you can love the winning. But you know, if you focus too much on the winning, you're gonna forget about the process that makes you win. And then if you forget about the process, you'll never win, and then you get into spiraling. I want to win, but I don't care about the process. I just want to win. I just want to win, and then you just over and over and over again. Also, resetting from team fights. This one's really important. I saw you do it twice, but twice is too many times. That's 10 seconds on the clock, and 10 seconds can snowball into 20 seconds for team fights, and 20 seconds for team fights is a plus a 10-second after it is a 30 to 40-second team fight in which you're entirely missing, just maybe because of your fault. That's a very, very controllable factor that you're able to just immediately mitigate. Don't stagger after team fights. Here, I'll write these down. So, 1, micro. We're going to go like A and B. A is your mechanics. 2 is your resetting from team fights. And then I'll just give you a second one that we can immediately work on. Let me think. I honestly forgot while I was ranting about these other two. Actually, that might be it. That might be those 3. Because I feel like those are really good ones to work on, and once you achieve those, because I don't want you like only working on those though, because those are very like low-level fundamental things that you got to get down, which are like very boring to get down. But 4, 3, 2. I can give you just like a general and macro one of assess the team compositions when the game starts. So when the game starts, press tab, hold tab. Or first of all, scout, and then hold tab. It's going to be harder to hold tab because you're like doing stuff. But yeah, if you hold, get this into an area where it's readable. If you hold tab and look at the team compositions, you can start to piece together in your mind where their weaknesses are. Oh yeah. Also, like one of the small tips is best and worst players. See, best and worst players, especially in comp. Like I said earlier, their Hanzo was very good. And so, be aware of that. Kind of piece it together. Don't let them like control your entire gameplay. But if your one character is like having a real rough time, and you can just help them by peeling from them just a little bit more, like if it's your Zenyatta and he's dying every once in a while, maybe consider swapping to Brig or something. But have that in your mind, the best and worst players, and you'll be able to see a bit of patterns of how you can better win your games in comp because of that. I mean, that's applicable to every scenario, but especially in comp, it's very pertinent with our current optimal competitive system where we're seeing diamonds in GM lobbies and GMs in diamond lobbies. You know, it'd be like that, and if you know about it, it's way better. And then, yeah, finally the tab thing. And then, so there's a whole nother world of Overwatch that I want to talk about with your team, but I feel like, or with you being able to play with your team, and you can use comms and start to play like way more high level. But before we get to that point, I very much emphasize, get your micro down. You'll never grow better as a player without the micro. These 3 like small the mechanics or micro, say micro, that's a bit better. Get your micro down so then you can start focusing and thinking. You don't have to hit all your shots. You don't have to heal all, like have perfect healing on or about. It's about healing the right people at the right time, especially a lot of the times to gain consistency. Resetting during team fights is a very important small habit that you just have to be able to grow as a player. To help you in your next comp games, the best and worst players, because there are a lot of times that I can definitely tell you could have saved one of your DPS players or been ready to save them at least. You know, it's the ready thing. It's not about actually saving them. Process, not results. Where it'll turn the tide of a team fight or at least mitigate the effect of the enemy DPS who was carrying the team fights. And then lastly, hold tab, try to look at who's on the enemy team, who's on your team, and how you can adapt your gameplay from just your standard botting out, heal botting, or whatever, taking angles, or however your playstyle is. And then you'll grow and you'll gain a healthy balance in between and be able to adapt to the situation while thinking.